Hello, and welcome to the show Writing in the Tiny House. The entire point of this podcast is to help the tormented artist by sharing what I know about writing, publishing, and stress management so that you can have the tools to produce the content that you have been eager to write. If you have the steps in place, you can produce a short story in as few as 3 months or a novel in as few as 18 months. And hopefully through the ideas in this podcast, you will have the wisdom to adjust that timeline if you need to. I am Devin Davis, the guy who lives and writes in a tiny house in northern Utah. Thank you for tuning in, and please enjoy today's episode of Writing in the Tiny House. Hello, and welcome to Writing in the Tiny House. How are all of the things, my friends? How is your December treating you? It has been busy. Oh my goodness. If you follow my Instagram, you will see that things have been nonstop here in the tiny house. I don't know why it is. Actually, I do know why it is. So I'm a person who does a lot of different things. And if you follow me on Instagram, you will see that I bake every single weekend as a way to relax and unwind. Baking is really therapeutic for me. And that's what this entire episode is actually all about. Therapy. Not traditional talk therapy. But December, again, back to my Instagram feed, it has been filled with bundt cakes, and bunts have been coming out of my ears this entire past month and a half since before Thanksgiving. Yes, since before Thanksgiving, because I did a bundt cake for Thanksgiving. And so, yeah, if you're interested in some delicious looking bunts, go ahead and hit my Instagram page. But sadly, there has not been a lot of writing that has happened because of that, or that has happened in addition to that. So, friends, as we wind down this year and this season of Writing in the Tiny House, this is actually the second to last episode of this season. There's one more coming up, and I know what the subject matter is going to be, but as I mentioned in the previous episode, I like these episodes in December to be more sentimental, to be more about my heartfelt experience with writing and why it happens and why I carry on with it, and why I do it despite the hard parts of writing. One of the things that I will struggle with in such a big way is just how challenging it is to share writing, especially if you're working on the really big projects. Even though I say something different in the intro of these episodes, most books take such a long time to write. And it can be hard to share bits and pieces of it along the way just because you're sharing them out of context. A reader cannot happen upon a little verse that happens in the middle of chapter 13 and fully understand the implication of that verse without knowing the entire book. And that is really a challenge with writing that I will always struggle with, especially if you are not already a household name. And if you don't have a way to do it as your full-time job yet, like if you're not making money, if it's not supporting you, sometimes there just isn't time in the day to do it. Therefore, it takes longer to get these projects done. Therefore, it's really challenging to share them, which is why I was excited at first for short stories. But short stories don't really work for the breadth and the depth of the world that I am building, which is why I'm revising one of my shorter things to be a full-blown novel. When I'm writing, a lot of people have different creative outlets, and so do I. I have more in addition to writing that I do regularly. But writing is the one that I have found is most therapeutic. And I mean that in a very real way. So all of us, when we find a creative outlet, there is always a therapeutic benefit to that. And that is real, that matters, but that is actually not what I'm talking about. For me, I am talking about the act of developing a character, developing conflict, developing relationships, and finding ways for those characters to work through them in a believable way, and how that helps me better understand the people around me. So I'm working on fiction, so nothing in the book is real. The people in the books are not real. I don't have like a historical person or even a historical place or a real place to point a finger at and pull inspiration from. Like, this is not historical fiction. I don't have any of that. But I am pulling every single day that I sit down to write, I am pulling what I understand about people and what I understand about relationships and applying it to how I am developing my characters. And I've experienced this in writing, and I've experienced this in reading books too. When I sit down, understanding that it's fiction, understanding that it's all made up, it is really cool to be pulled into a world and pulled into a story. I'm sure that if you're listening to this podcast, you can completely relate to that. And so it becomes real. And that's the whole point. The whole point is to write in such a way that it becomes real. I remember more than once thinking about characters and how they dealt with their day-to-day problems, or even the big problems, the big conflict, the big thing in the book that keeps you interested and keeps you motivated to read more. I remember on so many different occasions thinking to myself, yes, this is how a person like that would do this. Or, you know what? I don't think that's how they would have handled that. And then applying that to my life, applying that to similar situations. Granted, in fantasy, we get oftentimes a really big, overblown, huge, huge stakes, huge odds, like huge conflict, huge things. But it is perfectly okay to take situations from something so big and something so dramatic and still apply it into your life. And I remember reflecting on conversations that happened in what I was reading, or sooner, what I was listening to, just because I'm a big audiobook guy, and thinking how much I admired the way that conflict was handled in between the characters, as if the characters were people. And then I remember being face to face, I guess, or stepping into kind of a similar situation and thinking back on what I read in my fictional book and applying that to my current situation, or imparting little bits of wisdom that I gleaned from seeing how fictitious people handled their lives and how that applies to real people too. And so for me, writing and developing characters and developing good conflict and a good plot and whatever, for me, it is very much developing a life. It is like a mirror, or it is like a type of life to me. And being able to be the guy pulling all of the strings, or in this instance, typing all the words, it helps me see what works, what doesn't work, and what works in life, what is a successful way to handle stuff, what is a good way to handle anger, what is a good way to handle someone lashing out at you, and whatever myriad of different things. And then taking that and bringing it into my daily life with how I interact with my kids, how I interact with my friends, how I interact with the people that I'm dating, so that I can learn and grow. And my mortal experience, this life experience that we have of being humans here on this earth, expands, and it becomes more interesting and more valuable to me. So while expressing yourself in any creative way is definitely therapeutic, I hope that I was able to convey in this short episode kind of the other part of this beautiful act of therapy that writing has for me. And I encourage you to do that same thing. If you are listening to this podcast, odds are good that you are in the middle of a book of some description. Odds are also good that it's fiction. And so think back on your characters and what they are doing, how they are interacting with each other, how that is playing into the storyline, obviously, but also what are the lessons, or what are the ways that the conflict is handled, or some of the little words of wisdom that you can glean from those things that you can apply to your life too. Maybe you can behave a specific way to your spouse or to your sibling or to your children or to somebody at work because of something that you read in fiction. And hopefully that can expand this experience for you too and bring additional value and additional meaning into how you live your life. So this is how fiction and writing is like therapy to me. So thank you for joining me this week, and be sure to join me next week on the very final episode of this season of Writing in the Tiny House. Have a good day, guys. I hope that you are surviving this holiday season, and we will wrap it up next week. Thank you so much. And that is it for today. Go ahead and follow me on social media. On Instagram, I am at Author Devin Davis. On Twitter, I am at Author Devin D. And I also have an account on TikTok. Go ahead and find my information in the show notes of this episode. And remember that my short story Brigitte, which was published last fall, is available on Amazon as an ebook and on Audible as an audiobook. Go ahead and check those things out today. And be sure to join me on next week's episode of Writing in the Tiny House. Run by copy editor Chrissy Barton, Little Syllables Editing is a reliable resource for anyone looking to improve their manuscript. Chrissy does line edits, copy edits, and the final proofread for experienced writers and newbies alike. Go to littlesyllables.com and reach out to Chrissy today. A link is in the show notes.